fragment recovered from Governor Connolly's wrist wound was indistinguishable from the composition of the lead in the nearly whole bullet found at Parkland Hospital, that fact alone would lend strong support to the single bullet theory. Do you still have that view?
To some extent, that would be true, but in light of my new knowledge about the trajectory, particularly the vertical trajectory with the upward course through the body, then that statement would be much less definitive, much less positive than it was as expressed by me in that article a few years ago.
So if, in other words, there were such evidence, it would make a substantial impact upon your analysis of the improbability of the single bullet theory, except that, of course, there's still the question of the positioning of the bodies in the car. Is that accurate?
Extensive, detailed, complete neutron activation analyses of all the bullets and all the fragments, including those which had not been removed, including the one which in Governor Connolly's left thigh, including the one which I understand, according to sworn affidavits, was removed from the governor's chest, given to a nurse who gave it to a policeman who gave it to an FBI agent. If all of those things were done, Mr. Cornwell, then I would be prepared to discuss the impact of the NAA findings on the single bullet theory. In the absence of all NAA tests, I am not prepared to accept a piecemeal presentation of a few tests that some people in some government agencies felt could be done, and others which were not necessarily, which would not necessarily have to be performed.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
The committee at this time will operate under the 5-minute rule, starting with the chair. Dr. Wecht, you were one of a panel of 9 eminently qualified forensic pathologists. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I thank you for the characterization. I was one of 9, yes, sir.
And you do not quarrel with my categorization of them, the other 8, as being eminently qualified, do you?
No.
Now, with all of you being men of a profession in which you're certainly jealous of your reputation in the field, is there any reason why these other 8 men would take the position they have taken based upon anything other than medical certification?
Mr. Chairman, you would have to ask them that question. I do not mean to be either evasive and certainly not disrespectful, but it would be presumptuous of me to speculate on that. There are some things involving some present and former professional relationships and things between some of them and some people who have served on previous panels. In fact, 2 of the members of this panel have been previously involved, one under the auspices of CBS with the government's implied permission and delight, if not express sponsorship, and another one with the Rockefeller Commission. There are things of this nature, but you would have to ask them about whatever particular motivations or thoughts they may have. I can only do my very best, sir, to present to you the evidence as I have interpreted it and give you my conclusions and opinions therefrom.
Well, perhaps you can help me in this respect. Assuming that I'm the average American citizen who has been sitting out here today and listening to these hearings and viewing it on television as they are across the country, and when they hear the testimony as it has been reflected through Dr. Batten of the 8 other forensic pathologists as related to your testimony, tell me, what should the average American believe in terms of the medical evidence that has been presented here today? Should they believe them or should they believe you?
Well, I would give anything within reason to be able to find out what people who have been able to take the afternoon off and observe these hearings believe. I know that as of 1975, in a national poll conducted by CBS, certainly an agency which has not been particularly sympathetic to the critics' side of this business, about 85% of the American public was found to disagree, to reject one or more of the major conclusions of the Warren Commission report. I'm also mindful of the fact that in numerous other national surveys conducted by top pollsters in the past 12, 15 years, more than 50% of the American public has always expressed negative feelings concerning the Warren Commission report. As I am aware of your distinguished professional reputation prior to becoming a member of Congress as a trial attorney, the idea, the reality of forensic scientists disagreeing in a court of law is, of course, nothing that is foreign to you. I have witnessed it and participated in it many times. The numerical superiority that my 8 colleagues have over me is something that I cannot reflect upon. It is in your hands. I have been in that position. I can only hope you'll excuse the possible seeming lack of modesty that just maybe, and the number fits anyway with 9 people, that just maybe this might be analogous to a Supreme Court justice at some time in the past having expressed a dissent which in 10, 20, or 30 years became the law of the land. I can only hope, sir, that that may be the case here today.
I asked some other questions, but my time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions. I would just say to Dr. Wecht that I think you would probably agree that reasonable men of credibility on the same set of facts can reach different conclusions without questioning the motives of the others. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir. I do when there are reasonable differences of facts based upon interpretations. When things relate to hard physical reality, then, sir, I cannot go along with that statement.
Well, you don't say that this is an exact science, what we're talking about, do you?
I believe, sir, such things as straight lines in relationship to horizontal and vertical trajectories, positions of 2 human beings, measurements of the Zapruder film, the timing of it, the timing of the test firing of the Mannlicher container weapon. I believe, sir, that these things fall very much into the realm of the hard physical sciences, as opposed to the kinds of things that we as physicians are often involved in. Did the heart attack follow the emotional or physiological stress? Did the cancer come about after the blow to the breast? Those are in the realm of speculation and reasonable differences. In my opinion, I think that the evidence that has been discussed today, the physical measurements of the laws of mathematics, of physics, and so on, I believe, sir, that these do not fall within the realm of reasonable differences of opinion.
Well, I'm sure that the other members of your panel would disagree with your conclusion.
Yes, sir, I'm sure they would.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from District of Columbia, Mr. Fontroy.
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions at this time.
Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Dodd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wecht, thank you for your testimony. You've certainly articulated the issue before us today rather well. I'd like to pursue one area of questioning with you, if I could, in the time allotted to me. Your expertise is as a pathologist. That is your area of expertise. What I'm getting at is you don't have an expertise in photoanalysis. It's really as a pathologist. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir, except to the extent that photography, studying of wounds, and things of that nature are related to the practice of forensic pathology.
Okay. Aside from the condition of CE-399, the bullet, I gathered from your testimony that many of your conclusions regarding the single bullet theory rest to a large extent on the Zapruder film. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I would say that the Zapruder film is very important.
For instance, as to the positions of both President Kennedy and Governor Connally in the car, the appearances of both President Kennedy and Governor Connally at various frames in the film footage and so forth?
Yes, sir.
What I'm trying to suggest by this line of questioning is that your expertise using photographs and so forth rests on making assessments of cadavers, of after-the-fact circumstances, looking at wounds or photographs of wounds after a shooting, a killing has occurred. Is that correct, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, it so happens that I do a great degree of medical legal consultation work in all kinds of personal injury actions, medical malpractice, products liability, workers' compensation, thousands of cases in the past decade and a half, and I've had an opportunity, and I'm called upon quite frequently to become involved in matters of a medical, legal, forensic, scientific nature which may not necessarily be related to a dead body.
If I can recall all of that, what I'm getting at is this. Aside from the Zapruder film, and I might suggest the shooting of Jack Ruby, have you ever personally witnessed a killing, or have you ever had the opportunity to view film footage of an actual killing?
Shooting, sir?
A shooting.
I have never seen a killing of a human being by shooting. I have seen footage, yes, sir.
To what extent? I mean, how many occurrences, how many different shootings have you ever seen, actual shootings of a human being? A rough ballpark figure. I'm not trying to pin you down specifically.
Not a great number.
Two,
just
three?
Several. Yes, I think different film strips in various cases, documentaries.
To what extent is there a body of medical knowledge with regard to the predictable movements of a human body when shot?
Some. It depends on the nature of the weapon, the ammunition, the position of the body, the nature and extent of the wounds, the physical circumstances that the body is in, and so on. And these are things, of course, that we as forensic pathologists are called upon to reconstruct in a retrospective fashion in a fair number of cases. I would say that it definitely cannot be considered as a hard physical science. There are biological variations, no question.
Okay. I wonder if you might refresh my memory as to the various frames in the Zapruder film. You seem to have a pretty good working knowledge of the various numbers of frames. The frame I want to get at is the frame where you see, first of all, Governor Connally showing appearances of being shot. What frame was that?
That was frame Zapruder 237, I believe, maybe 230. I think 237. I do not know your exhibit number, but I think it was Zapruder 237.
And how many frames after that was the first appearances of President Kennedy showing evidence of being shot?
Excuse me, sir. Well, in the head wound, that was Zapruder frame 313. The earlier one of the president emerging from behind the Stemmons Freeway sign, I think that was 225, Zapruder 225.
So we're talking
when
about
we first see the president. So that's then about 12 frames that we see the president's reaction.
All right, what I'm getting at here is that given the fact that there is a very limited amount of medical knowledge with regard to body movements or predictable body movements when an individual is shot, and given the fact that there are apparently only 1 or 2 or 3, 4, 5 instances where you've had the opportunity to actually see film footage of someone being shot, given the fact that your expertise is as a pathologist and not as a photoanalyst, how can you state conclusively, as you do, aside from the appearance of 399 and others, that in fact there was not a single bullet theory, given the fact that there is this limited amount of knowledge?
Oh, that's very easy, sir, in this case. The pattern that you set forth would indeed be extremely applicable, for instance, to the head wound. You know, what about the president? Did he move backwards? How could he have moved backwards? Shouldn't he have moved forwards and so on? That indeed is something that I've always said I can't be sure of, whether it was opisthotonus, some other neuromuscular reaction, or whatever. But given the wound, Mr. Dodd, in the President's back, and knowing its trajectory, and knowing that it did not strike bone, and knowing that it was moving slightly upward, it doesn't make any difference, sir, what we may postulate about Mr. Kennedy's or Mr. Connolly's movements. We know, and looking at the pictures and from their eyewitness testimony and from all the bystanders and everybody, we know that there's just no way in the world that
Did I understand your statement? It doesn't make any difference?
No, sir, not in this case. Not in this case, because we have the bullet moving upward through President Kennedy and then moving downward at a 25-degree angle of declination. There's just no way in the world that the bullet could have done that. I have never heard an explanation from my colleagues. They just come back to the plausibility argument.
You misunderstood me. I was using your testimony that those various frames and body movements were evidence, part of the evidence to indicate that it would be impossible for a single bullet to have passed through both individuals.
Yes, sir.
Expired, but the witness can finish his answer.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. I apologize for not understanding your question. I agree with what you just said, and that is evidence that clearly demonstrates to me that it was impossible for 399 to have done what is attributed to it under the single bullet theory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have one question, but, Doctor, in supporting your theory, somewhat different from the panel, the spokesman, Dr. Vadden, he made the point that their findings were based upon the lack of any evidence to support any other possible alternative. Tell me, have you been privy of any other information outside of the information that this panel has been reviewing for some time?
No, sir, other than what Mr. Stokes had asked me about before, that examination of the primary copy of the Zapruder film at Life magazine in 1966. Nothing else. I also hope that I have kept more of an open mind and have also recognized that it is not my responsibility. I do not mean that I am disinterested or unmindful of the significance, but it is not my responsibility to retroactively justify and defend the investigation that was done, which I think was extremely superficial and sloppy, inept, incomplete, incompetent in many respects, not only on the part of the pathologist who did this horribly inadequate medical legal autopsy, but on the part of many other people. It's the kind of examination that would not be tolerated in a routine murder case by a good crew of homicide detectives in most major cities of America on anybody, just a plain ordinary citizen, let alone a president. So I don't get blocked, Mr. Ford, by the fact that I can't answer everything. I'm fast to admit that I can't answer everything, although on one of the sketches which we then didn't have a chance to get into, one that I had Mr. Purdy, requested Mr. Purdy to blow up, I show that that bullet that went through President Kennedy's neck could have continued on over the left side of the car. And I would like to say, sir, that that diagram was made years ago before I knew for certain that there was an upward trajectory from the back to the neck. With an upward trajectory, that suggestion that I made years ago now in my mind assumes much greater reality.
I don't have any further questions, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Okay. Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. McKinney.
This committee has obviously got to sit here and evaluate two very extremely different positions. So, and looking at your conclusions, if you were to take the three elements, the trajectory of the bullet, the condition of the bullet, or the film, which would you say in your hypothesis is the most important part of that picture? Most important issue?
Well, Mr. McKinney, the trajectory is to some degree related to the Zapruder film, to some degree. If I had to list those in priority, sir, I probably would say the trajectory would be number one, because these are, to me, straight line measurements, calculations. The condition of the bullet, number two, and the Zapruder film, which I must tie in back to the trajectories then as number 3, although that's hard to do, sir, but on the spur of the moment, I'd list them in that.
On the trajectory point, then, it's your opinion that there's no way that the president could have been in any kind of a position when he was behind that sign that would have allowed the bullet to go from low to high, rear to the front, and still have it in line to hit Governor Connally?
No, sir. Not at the point where it struck Governor Connally, and not with the angle of declination that it proceeded on through the governor. May I just add that very briefly, Mr. McKinney, of course, is something that we all realize, but I would like to have on the record that for all practical purposes, when the bullet struck President Kennedy, it was striking Governor Connally. I mean, at 2,000 feet per second, it's incalculable. It's the kind of a time that you and I, with our reflexes and our speech and our watches, can't even measure. So all of that happened in an infinitesimal moment. The bullet is through the president and through John Connally. I cannot possibly imagine anything, and I've never heard anybody who was there in the car, behind the car, the motorcycle policeman, and so on, ever suggest that something of a dramatic nature, and it would have had to have been dramatic, had occurred vis-a-vis the physical relationships of those two men at that precise fraction of a second behind the Stemmons Freeway sign.
Were you aware of the fact that the radiologists for the committee that examined the x-rays of the president and the x-rays of Governor Connally didn't find any metal chips or fragments in President Kennedy's neck or in Governor Connally's chest?
I'm aware of the former, sir, and I believe the latter, too, insofar as the radiologist is concerned. With regard to the latter, Governor Connally's chest, I am mindful of information that I do not recall from our panel, but which I'm aware of, I think, from Earl Goltz's column, a reporter in Dallas, and from other news media that picked it up, about a piece of metal that supposedly was removed from Governor Connally's chest, given by a nurse to a Dallas policeman standing outside, who then gave it to an FBI agent.
Have you ever seen any proof of this?
I seem to recall, Mr. McKinney, and it is vague, that there was some language, if not some kind of documentation of the receipt that was given to the policeman by the FBI agent, but I'm vague on that, sir.
But if it were true that there were no traces of metal found in either one of these areas, that could explain the condition of the bullet, couldn't it?
No, sir, because then, after emerging from the chest, it would have had to have struck the wrist. And as I've already explained, I do not believe that it would have been possible to have caused that comminuted fracture and to have emerged in the pristine condition. And then, of course, I must again come back to the trajectory that even with the absence of metal in the president's neck and the governor's chest, there's no way that that same bullet could have gone through those two portions of the anatomies of the two gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Time of gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, if the acoustical tests were to set up the exact time of the shots, and if it were possible to determine through photo analysis the precise alignment of the bodies, and these two things turned out to be consistent with the single bullet theory, would you change your views?
The acoustics test and more knowledge of the physical relationship of the two men, both of which, if I understand your question, sir, would permit physically,
yes,
the passage of the bullet in the fashion that is attributed to it. I would say that such information would go a long way in making me doubt my long-held beliefs, and that's all I would ask. Beyond that is a couple of simple experimental studies with the shooting of this kind of ammunition through some bones, and that would do it for me.
Thank you. Now, You talked about the second synchronized, simultaneously fired shot possibility. Remote possibility. Can't we as a panel dismiss this out of hand for these two reasons? First, if it went in the president's head and there's no exit wound somewhere else, it surely would have shown up on an X-ray somewhere in the brain area.
Oh, yes, if it had been a penetrating missile, Mr. Fithian, and that's why I referred to frangible type ammunition, which would not have had any degree of in-depth penetration.
And finally, would the bullet itself that penetrated Governor Connolly's wrist, would it have to have gone through the bone to fracture it?
I believe with this kind of comminuted fracture, sir, yes, that it would have had to have gone through the bone. I have heard arguments advanced in our discussions, and prior to that, I believe that the bullet just traversing the soft tissues of the wrist would have produced that kind of fracture. I do not accept that at all.
I'm not very good at medical analysis, and that's why we have you. If the bullet went through the bone, wouldn't there have to be some sort of a hole where it went through, or the fracture itself would have to be wide enough to let the bullet go through?
Oh, that's only if...
Unless it was a glancing blow.
Yes, sir. If the bullet went through more or less in the middle of the bone, then there might be a hole, but the bullet would not have had to have gone through directly through the mid-portion. A passageway with the bullet striking some portion of the bone could produce that kind of comminuted fracture. It would not have to leave a hole. As a matter of fact, very often they will not leave precise holes, but will cause shattering of bones. I do not believe such shattering would occur by a proximal passage of the bullet without some direct contact with the bone.
If evidence becomes available that the fragment removed from Governor Connolly's wrist matches C-399, wouldn't this tend to impair your interpretation?
I believe, as I had expressed previously to Mr. Cornwell, that it would certainly be some reason to pause for further reconsideration, but the value of neutron activation analysis would only be of probative value in this case, in my opinion, if NA8 studies were done on all the bullets and the bullet fragments that are available or that could be made available with relative ease.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, I didn't quite understand your response to Congressman Dodd, but I believe I understood the gist of it, and that is that your interpretation presented here today is really based on other than forensic pathological evidence. Isn't that generally true? Because we're talking about photographic alignment of bodies and things that have really nothing to do with the actual physical evidence taken, either photos of the body or medical examinations of the body.
I would not be able to accept that characterization because, in fact, the kinds of things that we're dealing with here arise in many homicide investigations. The study of photographs, the study of wounds, the study of a physical relationship of bodies to inanimate objects and to other people, eyewitness testimony, depositions, direct interviews with people, and so on. The only thing that I haven't had...
but these are not medical things, are they, Doctor?
Well, what I'm trying to say, sir, is they all fall within the purview, indeed, of a functioning, practical forensic pathologist. And I would consider them, yes, within my realm and within the realm of any other forensic pathologist overall review and evaluation of a case. And it's the kind of thing that I've done many times, and I'm sure my colleagues have too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions.
Okay. All right. Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Sawyer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions. I was going to ask you what your theory was of what happened to the other bullet that hit one of these people if it wasn't found in the car and no place it was hit. But I deduced from an answer you gave to one of the other questions that your view is that it passed over the top of the car after going through the president's back and neck?
I think, sir, that is a very real possibility, yes.
Well, then your theory is it must have been fired from the street.
No, sir. from a position much lower than the 6th floor. If it were in the Texas School Book Depository building, and that's a possibility that I do consider, it would have been from a lower floor. You would see, sir, if you had the entire physical terrain laid out for you, that you would be able to get that kind of a trajectory.
So I've been there, so I'm familiar with it. You also used the figure of 2,000 feet per second. Is that the correct velocity of these Mannlicher Carcanos?
I think I've seen 1980 and 2000. That's.
I would have thought from looking at it they'd be faster than that, but
I think sometimes I've seen it up to 2100, but I don't think I've ever seen it any higher than that.
I see. Have you ever seen any studies that show what a bullet does if it hits just a twig, as far as its course and its behavior?
Not controlled studies, sir. I've seen some bullets that have struck twigs, but I have not seen or conducted experiments along those lines.
Well, I have seen studies that show that they go all erratic behaviors just by striking a small twig in hunting studies, really, is what they were. You've never seen such?
No, sir, not such studies. I do not express here the opinion that there is definitive evidence that the bullet struck a twig. I merely raise that or consider that as a possibility. I really think that it is more likely that the bullet